Welcome back, everybody. This is part 3 of the Puch Magnum rebuild. In this episode, we're going to try to take the engine off, remove the pedal shaft, some other things. Basically just more teardown so we can rebuild the engine and put everything back together. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. On this side of the bike, we're going to remove the carburetor, the air box, and the wiring. Normally I would take a picture of the wiring, but I'm not going to do that because we are going to rewire the bike. Turn the carburetor sideways and wiggle it out. Disconnect the wiring harness. Now we're ready to remove the engine. It's 3 bolts. They are all 13 millimeter. It's really important not to damage these threads. If you want, you can leave the nut right on top to help. Now slide this and wiggle it out. Put the pin back together and set it aside. Everything's off the frame. Now we can clean the frame up a little bit and then rebuild the engine and put it back on. To clean the bike, I'm just using simple green degreaser in a spray bottle and a soft brush. I just get the frame wet, spray it with the degreaser, clean it with the brush a little bit, and then I spray it off. This is the Moped Factory ZA50E50 engine stand. It is super handy and you can get them at Dos Cycles. I'm going to start tearing down this E50 by removing the head first. Remove the flywheel cover. Now we can remove the piston. Press the pin out and then pull it. There's a lot of wear on this side of the piston. Maybe it overheated or soft seized. Now I'm going to remove the ignition. This is an M26 puller. It's extremely handy if you're working on an E50 or a ZA50. Be sure not to lose that Woodruff key because we're going to need that for the next crank. Set that aside. Remove this screw and this screw. Push out this little grommet and set it aside for later. Remove the clutch cover. I use an impact driver. I don't use the impact function of it. I just really like it because it's really big and easy to grab. To remove the clutch bell, there is a little clip right here. Remove that clip. Slide the plate out. This is a 17 mil. There is a Woodruff key that you want to remove and save. To remove the clutch bell, remove the circlip. Then there's a spacer, a bushing, and another spacer. And there's another circlip that we'll use on the other crank. Now we're ready to split the case. The easiest way is to use a mallet, and if that doesn't work, then use 2 screwdrivers after you've loosened it up with the mallet. There you go. You can see how rusty this crank is. I have a paper towel, and I mean, it's just fuzzy with rust. We do have to remove the bearings and sprocket from the main gear because we're going to replace them. Remove the seal. Set the snap ring aside, we do need that. Now we have to use the bearing separator. There's a snap ring underneath this bearing, so do not push the separator all the way together because that'll ruin the snap ring. So have it a little bit out. And I do have a little hole right here. These are all the odds and ends, little nuts and bolts. I fill this up to let them soak while I clean everything else. Now just start cleaning. Now we have to press the bearings onto the main gear. The easiest way to do this is with a press. You can also do it with heat. Flip it over and do the other side. This side requires the snap ring and a seal. I do this one with the spring facing out so that way I can make sure that it's still attached. When we put this into the case, you want to make sure that the gap in the snap ring is facing up. Now we can put bearings on the crank. We can start with the ignition side, lube the bearing and the crank. You can use heat and make this really simple and fast. I use a Tusk bearing pusher because I don't like waiting for the heat. So I put the bearing on, then I put this little guy on, then I put the crank nut. Okay. Now you can slide your seal on. Okay. Remember, we do need a 1mm gap between this bearing and the seal on the ignition side. We'll set that later. This is the clutch side. First you want to oil it a little. Oil your seal. The spring faces the transmission. Out. Walk that on. Now your bearing has a snap ring and it's offset. You want the offset facing the transmission. Slide that on. There we go. Alright. So first put on the circlip. Then the spacer. A little lube. The bushing. The clutch bell. And the last circlip. Okay. Now we can put the crank assembly into the case. When you put the crank in, you want to make sure that the little snap ring is facing down into the case, and then when you flip over the case, it'll be facing up. The ignition side seal needs a 1mm gap. You can do this by eye or by a feeler gauge. This is so premix can get down into the bearing and oil it. I'm using Ultra Black RTV gasket maker. It is gas and oil resistant, and I smear just a little layer with my finger. But now we can put the cases together, carefully line them up. Once you have them all finger tight, go around and make sure they're all the same tightness. You don't want to over tighten them, and I don't tighten them all the way for at least 12 to 24 hours. Now I'll go around with a little rag and catch any excess goop that might have been squished out of the case seams. I'm going to wait about 12 hours for the case sealant to harden up a little bit. Then I'm going to torque all the bolts, and then I'll put the top end on, the ignition and the clutch. Welcome back everyone, it's been 12 hours. Now I'm going to go around and tighten all these bolts down, and then we can put it back together. Put the Woodruff key in. Now pull the wires through the plug. Slide this in and then pull each wire out. There we go. For the clutch side, put the Woodruff key in, then the clutch, then your wave washer, and then the nut. Starter plate, and your snap ring. Make sure the opening of the snap ring is not in the opening of the clutch bell. Align your clutch gasket. I usually get one bolt started. The clutch is done, now we can do the top end. I like to oil my gaskets. I'm going to oil the needle bearing a little. The piston has an arrow on it that points towards the exhaust. Take your circlip. You can tap it the rest of the way in with a little screwdriver. And then rotate it around so the opening is facing down towards the crank. Now I lube up the piston a little. You want to locate this little pin and press the ring together. Then you can slide the cylinder on. Now we can install the head. I'm not using a head gasket because this is an O-ring head. First I put on lock washers with a magnetic screwdriver. Then I put the head nuts on with a magnet. Then I bring everything up finger tight. Once they're finger tight, I tighten them to 84 inch-pounds. Thanks for watching, everybody. This engine is done. Now all we have to do is put it back on the Magnum, put the carb on, the exhaust, do some wiring, and we should be good to go. Thanks for watching this episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe.